That's what we do here. I'm Athirat Aich, and I'm the executive producer for The Heat on CCTV America.
Culture Express. See the world in color.
We are CCTV America.
Welcome back. The Colombian election campaign has been marred by controversy. Both camps have been accused of using dirty tactics, and former President Alvaro Uribe has been accused of pulling the strings behind the scenes in the Zuluaga campaign. Are these issues to blame for the low voter turnout in last month's election? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now by Alberto Bernal, the head of research and a partner in Bulltick Capital Markets, Natalie Aljonte, an associate director at the Atlantic Council's Latin America Center, and Eric Farnsworth, the vice president of the Council of the Americas and Americas Society. Thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anand.
Natalie, when we look at these two candidates, do you see any major differences between them?
I think that the differences are twofold. There's the campaign difference, which has been the FARC negotiations, which has been discussed to no end. Both have a huge divergence in the way that they see things should be moving forward. All of these people have been part of the rhetoric, but Santos has a lot more of the liberal values, liberal party values in terms of gay rights, and he's much more progressive in terms of his social stance. So that's also a huge divergence in the two candidates. Okay. Alberto, there's a point that Natalie brings up there that both sides in the campaigns have looked at the FARC issue very differently, but Zuluaga has changed track when it comes to dealing with FARC. At one time, he adopted this very hardline attitude saying no negotiations, but now he is open to the idea of talking to the group.
Yeah, but Anand, he has kept the issues before talking to the FARC. He's still going to ask for the FARC to stop bombing pipelines or kidnapping, and getting children into war. So basically, even though he has said that he will talk to the FARC, the conditions to talking to the FARC have not changed. And this, by the way, these are exactly the same conditions that President Santos had in 2010. This is the agenda that he ran with, which is, yes, I'm going to talk to the FARC. We all have to, pretty much every Colombian understands that this conflict is not going to end through bullets, but through a negotiation. But the conditions in 2010 were, yes, I'm going to talk to the FARC as long as they agree to stop bombing infrastructure in Colombia, putting landmines, kidnapping people, killing people, etc., etc. So what I heard from Zuluaga last week was that, yes, I'm going to sit down with the FARC, but the conditions need to be there, which means that you have to stop continuing the violence against the Colombian public before going into the conversations in earnest. So that's what I heard from him. Some people have heard other things, but that's exactly what I heard from the guy.
Okay, Eric, Santos puts it far more plainly and simply. He says, support the candidate who wants to end the war, i.e. me, or support the candidate who wants to continue with the war.
Well, I think that's a bit dramatic. The truth of the matter is both candidates, in fact, most of the Colombian people want violence to end. They want the war ended, and the question is very much under what conditions and under what terms. President Santos launched the peace negotiations, and those are ongoing. But as we just heard, candidate Zuluaga, were he to be elected, would continue those discussions. And I think that's a key point. You know, we talk about differences in the two candidates, but the truth of the matter is, if you look at the macro level comparison of the two, they're really quite similar in some ways. They're both for financial orthodoxy, they're both for growing the economy, they're both for foreign investment, they're both for a good relationship with the United States, and they both want to continue the discussions in terms of the peace negotiations. Now, they might do that differently, but at the macro level, this is almost the tyranny of small differences, which are always amplified in campaigns wherever you go. So I think that's a little bit of what's going on here, too.
And, you know, at the outset, we mentioned that ex-President Alvaro Uribe has been pulling the strings behind this campaign. Santos at one time, you know, owed his position as president to Uribe. In fact, he was Uribe's favored choice when he became president. But now that seems to have all changed. The favored choice now seems to be Zuluaga. What happened there? How did that change?
Well, I think that during the Santos presidency, you saw that there was a difference in ideology that came out, that emerged. And, you know, former President Uribe took to Twitter and, you know, took to TV, and he's just such a great communicator. He's started to, you know, massively just express his disdain with some of the decisions that President Santos had made. And because President Santos realized that this is a President Santos presidency, not President Uribe presidency again, he, you know, held his ground, and that caused sort of a shattering of the two.
Eric, does this specifically have to do with the way Santos has been handling the FARC issue?
Well, I think that's a large part of it. But, you know, there's also some deeper changes here going on, too. I don't think you would have seen this issue arise 10 years ago before social media, for example, was so prominent. The truth of the matter is President Uribe, former President Uribe, has the opportunity to get his message out broadly to the Colombian people through social media in a way that simply didn't exist before. So previously in Colombia or in other Latin American countries, or indeed most countries around the world, former presidents tend to literally and figuratively go away. President Uribe has chosen to stay active in the Colombian political system. In fact, now he's in the Colombian legislature, and he also has very much tried to amplify his message through social media. So that, plus a very strong disagreement in the context of the peace negotiations, which we've been talking about, add to each other and has contributed very much to the current situation.
Alberto, what do you make of Alvaro Uribe's involvement in the election? As Eric said, you know, he's playing a very big role in what is taking place there.
Yeah, that's true. And in fairness, and just following what Eric was saying, you know, when you speak to President Uribe, when you listen to his arguments, he says the following. He says, let's suppose he's talking to me, having a conversation, and I confront him with this issue. He'll say, look, Alberto, President Pastrana ran under the agenda of sitting down and negotiating the rules of the game and the country, et cetera, or the future of the country with the FARC. Why? Because Colombians, we elected Pastrana in 1998. I myself voted for him for going ahead with the peace negotiations, because at that point in time we said, you know, this is enough. We need to talk to these people, get to some kind of agreement. If we have to change some of the rules of the game, so be it. But we need to have peace in this country. In 2010, the agenda or the campaign of Santos was one of continuity of the policies that were implemented by President Uribe, which basically meant, you know, we're going to have a conversation with the FARC, but not on the issues having to do with the country or with the future of the country, let's say land reform, telecommunications reform, or involvement in politics, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to have a conversation about that, but we're going to have a conversation on the demobilization terms of these outlaws, because the FARC are outlaws. So that was the campaign strategy and the campaign message of Santos. And then the message changed. And of course, we all know that President Uribe is a very passionate person, and he can't just be away from politics. And that's why the relationship broke, because he really thought that the decision of Santos to move away from democratic security, et cetera, was in a way just going against what Colombian people elected him for. So that's why the relationship broke.
Eric, there appears to be a contradiction here. And on the one hand, as you pointed out, more Colombian people want a deal with FARC. Yet more people voted for the candidate who is reluctant to do a deal with FARC in the first round.
Well, I think the question is, what is the nature of that deal? And a lot of this hinges on, frankly, what do you do with the combatants once they demobilize? Do they have impunity? In other words, can they simply reintegrate into the political system legally? Without punishment, if you want to put it that way, for their activities, or is there a price to be paid? And many in Colombia say, okay, let's deal with the FARC from a negotiation perspective, let's come to peace, let's get the FARC demobilized, but then what do you do with the folks who have visited violence and destruction on the country for 50 years? That's an active and a very live question, both in Colombia generally and also in this discussion. And I think it's on that basis that, in fact, the two candidates are really fighting out to see whose vision for Colombia is really really going to prevail.
Okay, Natalie, let's talk about the relationship with Venezuela. It's been a very contentious relationship. Is it simply down to the point that if Zuluaga wins, that relationship gets testier, or if Santos wins, it stays as it is? It gets a little bit better.
Oh, I think it's safe to guess that if Zuluaga wins, that the relationship between Venezuela and Colombia is going to increase in its tensions. Based on the rhetoric of the campaign, based on the length in which President Santos has gone to improve those relationships through the FARC negotiations and through a lot of work that they've done together. But it's also safe to say that Venezuela is in such a moment of instability that it's really hard to know what the future lies long term for the country. So I would say, given what we know now, President Santos' re-election would maintain a good relationship, or a much improved relationship between the two neighboring nations. But there's still a lot that we don't know in terms of what's going to happen within the country.
Right. Eric, do we have a situation here where the FARC is actually going to determine the future relationship with Venezuela? In other words, if there's a deal, that relationship gets better. If there's no deal, it gets worse.
Well, they certainly have an active say in it. There's no question about it. And it's not just in Bogota, the capital of Colombia, but also in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, too, because you've already seen the president of Venezuela make comments about the campaign in Colombia in terms of who's going to get elected and intervening in Colombian politics. So this is a very active conversation, if you want to put it that way, between the two countries. But it is really interesting. Look, Colombia's traditionally most important relationship is arguably with Venezuela. It's not with the United States. It's not with Brazil. Historically, economically, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is a very real pragmatic need for both countries to stay connected, at least economically. And to the extent that the politics intervene, that really hurts the people on both sides of the border. So it's going to be really interesting. But whoever's elected in Colombia does tend to view that relationship perhaps as an important one. Well, they do, but the question is, how do you deal with that? And what prioritization do you put? Do you take more of a pragmatic approach to Venezuela, or do you take more of a political approach? And I think that's an open question. At the end of the day, though, I don't think anybody wants to blow up the relationship with Venezuela. And I think we also have to look in terms of how the leaders in Caracas are viewing this, because they're not without a say in how this goes as well. And to the extent they feel that it suits their political interests domestically, they're also going to use Colombia as a bit of a bogeyman and also try to highlight that relationship and maybe intensify their rhetoric against Colombia, too. So this is a two-way street. And in fact, what President Santos has done is trying to tamp down some of that rhetoric, try to get it more in a pragmatic view.
Alberto, do you see it the same way that, what we're hearing a lot about now is campaign rhetoric, but at the end of the day, when either of these leaders get into power, they will be very pragmatic in their relationship with Bogota?
Yeah, pretty much. And again, let me just stress one point that was mentioned before, which is the FARC. We all know, this is no secret, we all know that the Maduro government shelters the leaders of the FARC. There's very significant intelligence from both the U.S. and Colombia that the leaders of the FARC can go and stay in Caracas without much of a problem. In fact, they're pretty much invited. And another piece of proof of that was with the second in command of the FARC, a guy they name as an alias as the Singer. And he was in Caracas, and then the government of Colombia actually asked Caracas to send him to Cuba so that he could participate into the conversations with the FARC. So the intelligence is there, and and this is going to remain what perhaps the most relevant sticking point on the relationship, which is the sheltering of the FARC and the help of the FARC and the apparent financial support of the FARC, even though nowadays Venezuela doesn't have any money, so probably the FARC is not receiving any money from the Venezuelan government. Now, Natalie mentioned that the relationship with Santos is probably going to be better, and I agree with that statement, because Santos's strategy, and that's why he has moved so much to the left, is to keep a good relationship going with Venezuela so that he can help him with the conversations. And I do think that Zuluaga is going to take a much more feisty approach and bring back the conversations of, you people are sheltering these terrorists, we cannot go in this way. Even though this is not going to blow up, as Eric says, but the Uribe way of looking at the world is probably going to come back here, and the relationship is going to become a little bit less stable. Now, does this mean that Colombia's economy is going to suffer? Not at all. And you know why? And then because there's no money. So Venezuela doesn't pay Colombia because there's no money. So the trading between the two countries has pretty much come to a standstill. Okay,
we have 90 seconds left, and I want to get all your opinions on the other very important relationship that with the United States. Is that going to stay pretty much the same?
I would say yes. I mean, the United States historically has been a wonderful partner to Colombia, and I think that though there are many differences between the two candidates, their foreign policy towards the United States should remain unchanged and continually improving.
Okay, Eric, Plan Colombia remains the centerpiece of that relationship. It continues as it is right now.
It'll continue. The funding levels are going to decrease over time and are decreasing over time, but it will continue to be an important part. Free trade agreement continues to exist between the U.S. and Colombia that's just now being implemented. The truth of the matter is this is a strong relationship. It's a bipartisan foreign policy success story for Washington, and in fact, I would see that to continue no matter who's elected in Colombia.
Okay, Alberto, does it matter to Washington who's elected?
No, I don't think it matters too much. I do think that if Santos is reelected, Santos is going to take a much more, let's say, get closer to the Bachelet way of looking at things. If Zuluaga is elected, I do think that Colombia will move closer to the U.S. in terms of the regional issues and stand by the U.S. on like, for example, the Carta Democrática with Venezuela.
Okay, we're going to have to end it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us your questions, comments, and story ideas to theheat@cctv-america.com. And now you can listen to CCTV America programs 24/7 from anywhere in the United States by simply calling 231-460-1199. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us. In South Africa.